We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case.
Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country. We've plenty coming up. The autumn statement budget, black holes and the balance between higher taxes and cuts. Is the government playing with fire, politically and economically? And if you were the Chancellor, what would you do? Why is the Prime Minister at COP27? And bargains to be had as restaurants and shops recycle what they don't sell. Oh, and Christmas markets open. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news. Here's Polly Middlehurst.
Alice, thank you. The top story on GB News today. The UK's Alok Sharma has handed over to COP27 in Egypt with an opening speech urging world leaders to take concrete steps and fast to tackle global warming, saying inaction will lead to climate catastrophe. The president of the COP26 summit, which was hosted last year in Glasgow, admitted that despite progress in the past year, the world is not on track to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees.
How many more wake-up calls do world leaders actually need? A third of Pakistan underwater, the worst flooding in Nigeria in a decade. This year, the worst drought in 500 years in Europe, in 1,000 years in the US, and the worst on record in China.
Well, the Prime Minister himself will make a pledge to make the UK a clean energy superpower when he addresses the COP26 summit tomorrow. He'll be urging all countries to move away from the use of fossil fuels. And he'll be warning that tackling global warming is fundamental to future prosperity and security. Mr Sunak will also argue that the shock in the oil and gas markets caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February highlights the need to move to cheaper and cleaner sources of energy. Well, in our other top story today, nurses across the UK have, for the first time, voted in favour of national strike action in a dispute over pay. More than 300,000 members of the Royal College of Nursing were balloted. That's the biggest ever in the union's 106-year history. The walkouts are set to take place within the next few weeks, possibly taking place before Christmas. And it's likely patients may face disruption to surgical operations and hospital appointments. The government could revive the British Bill of Rights in a bid to tackle the number of migrants crossing the English Channel in small boats. The legislation would give the United Kingdom courts supremacy over the European Court of Human Rights, preventing judges in Strasbourg interfering in government policy, including sending migrants to Rwanda for processing. The bill was shelved by the former Prime Minister Liz Truss, but the Justice Secretary Dominic Raab said its return would end the abuse of UK law. National Highways has secured a High Court order to ban the campaign group Just Stop Oil from disrupting traffic, but so far only on the M25. The order states that anyone entering the motorway, attaching themselves to any object or structure on it, or assisting others can be held in contempt of court. Protesters could face imprisonment, an unlimited fine, and the seizure of assets. To the United States now, where New York City's fire department says it's dealt with its 200th fire this year, caused by a lithium battery. At least 38 people were injured in an apartment building fire believed to have been caused by a battery inside an electric scooter. Video shows firefighters rescuing residents from the 20th floor of the burning building. 2 people are in a critical condition in hospital and 5 others are seriously injured. And staying in the States, midterm elections are on the horizon, and the biggest names in American politics are in the state of Pennsylvania, trying to tip votes in their favour. Donald Trump has been showing his support for the Republican candidate and TV personality Dr. Mehmet Oz. Meanwhile, Joe Biden and Barack Obama are both campaigning for the Democrat nominee, John Fetterman. Mr. Obama emphasising the importance of the midterms.
A fair economy that gives working people a fair shot. That's on the ballot. Fundamental rights are on the ballot. Truth and facts and logic and reason and basic decency are on the ballot. Democracy itself is on the ballot. The stakes are high.
Here in the UK, general tickets for Glastonbury 2023 went on release today and sold out within an hour. The site initially experienced a few technical problems, with the site continually crashing under the weight of demand. Tickets for the event sell at around £350 each. Twitter has launched a subscription service that allows users to buy the blue tick verification symbol next to their name for a monthly fee of £7. Self-styled Chief Twit and the new owner of the social media site, Elon Musk, has implemented the new measure to stop Twitter losing money. The company lost almost £195 million last year. The blue tick verification system was previously used to identify authentic, influential users on the platform. And lastly, the Prime Minister has announced an extra bank holiday to mark the King's coronation next year. The holiday will take place on Monday, the 8th of May, after His Majesty's coronation on the Saturday. Rishi Sunak says he looks forward to seeing people coming together and celebrating to pay tribute to King Charles III. That's all your news for now. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Polly, thanks very much indeed. 6.5 minutes past 12. In a little over a fortnight, on November the 17th, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt will deliver his autumn statement, his tax-raising, spending-cutting package to get the UK out of the fiscal hole that we find ourselves in. Now, it's reported that the first draft of his detailed plans to plug that fiscal black hole, estimated to be at least £50 billion, goes to the Office of Budget Responsibility today. Now, incidentally, that 50 billion's a bit of misleading. Total outstanding national debt is close to £2.5 trillion. That's 2,500 billion. And the annualised deficit's running at about another £100 billion. That said, on the world stage, Japan, Italy, the United States of America, Canada and France are all more indebted than we are. So, what November 17th is really about is, rather than just filling a black hole, it's trying desperately hard not to let it get much bigger. As for Hunt's fiscal black hole, his boss, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, caused a lot of it, with his policies as Chancellor during the pandemic, with lockdowns, furlough and the rest of it. Putin didn't help by invading Ukraine, which resulted in sanctions, which in turn pushed up the global price of energy, resulting in billions more being spent to ease the pain on you and me and the rest of us. So that's the backdrop. I have 2 worries. The medicine could make the illness of national indebtedness and looming recession even worse. I'm also deeply concerned that much more of the talk is about tax rises, upfront or stealthy, and far less of it is about cuts in spending and restrictions on what the state can and can't do, should and shouldn't do. Now, Ian Duncan-Smith in today's Sun newspaper and Robert Colville in the Sunday Times are both well worth reading on those themes when you've got time. First on taxes. Jeremy Hunt may scale back the reversal in the National Insurance 1.25% rise, so it only applies to basic rate taxpayers from next April. Therefore, someone earning above the higher rate would still pay national insurance at 3.25%. Income tax thresholds, already frozen until 2026, could be frozen even longer, dragging many more of you into paying income tax in the first place, and those who are well enough off to pay the higher rates sooner. It's a bit sneaky, but it's very lucrative. On spending cuts, the leaks and rumours are gloomy for the poorest. The triple lock on the state pension could see a rise of just over 10% in the spring to compensate for inflation as measured in September. But Mr Hunt may drop that, despite the manifesto commitment, and go for a smaller rise in line with perhaps rises in average earnings. That would roughly halve it. Benefits also could be targeted, with Mr Hunt refusing to say whether they will rise in line with inflation, as they normally do, in April. They'd hurt the least well off and see their spending decline. On spending cuts, infrastructure and the supply side of the economy could also be targeted. Jeremy Hunt could cut planned investments on things like HS2, the Northern Powerhouse rail link, nuclear power stations, even Sizewell C, although there's been a lot of yeah but no but yeah about that particular issue. And remember, just as last week's rise in interest rates hits you and me as borrowers, it also hits the government, the biggest borrower of all. So here's the problem as I see it. There's much more about where they might take more from us than there is on where they might spend less and try to do less. Sunak told The Times yesterday the state can't do everything. Well, it's giving a pretty damn good go of it at the moment. Some of what they are considering, cutting infrastructure, is short-sighted because it creates jobs, pays wages and gives the economy more of what we need. That's Robert Colville's point in the Sunday Times. All areas of public spending, of course, have their defenders, but few have serious inspectors or guardians of the taxpayer who pick up the tab for it, beyond the Public Accounts Committee, who, to be fair, give it a good go, and I've got a member of that coming up on the programme a little later on. So today on the People's Channel, we're looking at where you'd make cuts, given the chance, and the dangers and benefits of such cuts as you see it. We're also looking at the whispered nightmare that cutting public spending, especially on infrastructure, and taking yet more out of your pockets and mine, and therefore the economy's tills, will simply make that looming recession even deeper and last even longer. As always, I want to hear what you think. Get in touch, email gbviews@gbnews, go on Facebook, tweet @gbnews or tweet me directly. First up, a very good friend of mine, Councillor Claire Purcell, who is a former Home Office Special Advisor to the Minister for Immigration and herself an active Tory. A blunt question to start off with. Do you buy the political narrative? Because it strikes me that your party, the Conservative Party's core vote, is allergic to tax rises and is crying out for spending cuts and a smaller state.
I'm not so sure it's crying out for spending cuts, because I think the majority of people who represent communities will look at the services that have already been cut and fear that there is nowhere else to go. Looking at bus services, libraries, social care, those kind of things. Nobody wants those to be cut any further. And raising taxes is distinctly unconservative, so of course we would look for reducing those taxes. But it is a bit of a balance, and as you've pointed out, that is one enormous black hole, and it isn't going to be filled simply by raising a few taxes, stealth taxes, and reducing spending. I mean, it isn't just going to balance out. Yeah. So I think the Chancellor needs to be a lot more inventive about what he's going to do, and nobody...
Doesn't he also need to be more transparent? Because you echoed the narrative there. You know, it's a huge black hole. Is it, compared to £2.5 trillion of long-term debt and 100 billion of annualised deficit? I mean, relatively speaking, it's peanuts.
It may be peanuts on a balance sheet, but if you look at the effect that it has on people's lives, then it is enormous. And I don't think we can take that away. When you're talking about numbers with so many zeros you can't comprehend, you need to look at what you can culpably aim at the government, which is this 50 billion. And a lot of it has been caused by the previous Chancellor, now current Prime Minister, with no plans as to how we get out of this. So I think there's a real worry that it's just going to grasp on those things which seem the easiest, very, very unconservative way of doing something, and ignores the fact that you need growth in businesses for longer term to get us out of this, rather than a quick fix at the moment of slapping taxes on the likes of you and I immediately, and also not taxing those with the broadest shoulders. I mean, that's where you need to go.
The other crucial fact, and you know it even better than I do, is that there is real anger out there. Take an example. You used to be a special advisor to an immigration minister. Ordinary folk are saying you can find millions of pounds to put people coming across the channel in small boats into hotels, spend millions of pounds on centres that are there to process people that don't seem to be terribly well run, and according to one of the papers, being run by amateurs now, people who've just started out, almost work experience type people. But you cannot look me in the eyeballs as a pensioner and say, I will stand by the triple lock. You cannot look me in the eyes as someone who's on universal credit, who your party desperately need to vote again, particularly behind the red wall. You can find that money, but you can't find mine.
I think that's always the problem. It's looked at as government money, and it isn't. It is taxpayers' money, and we need to be a lot better at putting that message across and spending the money where we should. And I do agree with you. The amount that we're spending on hotels just is inconceivable. We cannot continue on that respect. But also look at what's being spent in the NHS, and that is a whole more uncomfortable conversation in the long term.
And it's ring-fenced. Don't dare look there. Don't dare be radical.
And that's the real problem about it, because that is an enormous part of the taxpayers' money going into the NHS, which isn't supplying the services that it is meant to do. So there are an awful lot of conversations to have. I think immigration is the one that is mostly in people's minds because it's visible. The NHS is lurking there at the back, but nobody wants to tackle that.
Have you ever been gloomier as a Conservative Party supporter?
I don't necessarily think I have, and I've been a member for a very long time because I'm now quite old, and I think that this is probably the most concerned I've ever been, because all of those things that I stand for, that I believe in, the core beliefs of conservatism, are just being wiped out. And I think it's that fear of being a Conservative at the moment that is stopping the party from doing all of these things. They seem to be going back into a more socialist, budgetary manner, and I don't like that, and I don't think the general public wants that. Otherwise, they would have voted Labour in the last few elections.
I've just been told that's our last question, but you're coming back at 1 o'clock, which is brilliant, so we can carry on the conversation. But that it wasn't a throwaway line, because you don't do throwaway lines, but an awful lot of the emails from our viewers and listeners have been saying, I just don't see the difference anymore, might as well vote Labour, because this is not a Conservative government anymore. Maybe we'll talk about that at 1 o'clock, but for the time being, Claire, great to see you as always, and thank you very much for your honesty and your candour. Former Conservative advisor and Conservative councillor Claire Purcell there. And next up, as I said in that introduction, is a member of the Public Accounts Committee, Sir Geoffrey Clinton-Brown, who's the Tory Member of Parliament for the Cotswolds. He's also a former minister and, as I say, importantly, a member of the Public Accounts Committee. Geoffrey, great of you to join us. You are very welcome, as always. Claire, Tory councillor, former special advisor to Tory ministers, never felt gloomier and deeply worried for the prospects of her party and your party pulling this off and still being in government in 2 years' time. Do you share that gloom?
So, Alastair, great to be with you this morning. I thought you might start there. I've been a member of Parliament for 30 years. The worst period for the Conservative Party, in my view, was that 92 Parliament, running from 92 to 97, because it was clear, week in, week out, that we were just sinking. I think if we can get this statement, and it's going to be very, very difficult on the 17th of November, because hopefully this will put us onto a path of fiscal and monetary stability so that come the election, and this is the really important part for any political party, the people of this country will see that we've done the right things, the responsible things, maybe the very difficult things, but actually as a result of that, things are now going to get better. And that is really, really important. What they want to see at the election is that the economy is in safe hands, which it won't be under Labour, that the immigration situation is sorted out, that they can walk safely on their streets. All of these things is what the British people are going to be looking for. And I'm very hopeful under Richie's stewardship that that's where we'll get to.
You referenced back to John Major's government and the defeat to Tony Blair. But I just wonder if your party, over that period of time, has lost the Thatcherite will to take a seriously grown-up, close look at public spending, take a knife to it and say, this we cannot do at that scale, this we cannot do anymore. Health service, benefits, welfare state, you've lost it.
So you're dead right. You can't have low taxation without having a modest level of expenditure. If the Conservative Party wants to keep on with the same level of expenditure, it has to have a higher level of taxation. And that is just plain economic sense. Now, Liz Truss tried the experiment of going too far, in my view, far too far the other way, with a huge range of tax cuts. The markets wouldn't wear it. We've had to pare that back to the tune of 35 billion. And I think that is the right thing to do. What we'll now have to see is where the Chancellor needs to go. And I stress to you and your listeners, I don't know any of the inside information, so I can speculate and say what I like. But it's a question of how much the Chancellor needs to raise in the forthcoming financial statement. And my guess is that he needs to raise between 30 and 40 billion.
Wow. You will have seen the interview in the Times newspaper yesterday with Rishi Sunak, who you mentioned twice in that answer, Geoffrey. Would you, as a very experienced and senior Conservative, you're also treasurer of the 1922 committee that's been so busy recently electing leaders and new leaders of the party, would you like to see Mr. Sunak and perhaps Mr. Hunt put some flesh on the bones of that claim that they and the state cannot do everything, and have a really radical rethink in one or two areas between now and the general election?
Well, the problem for us is that we've been through the pandemic, and Rishi Sunak, as the then Chancellor, quite rightly gave out a huge amount, £400 billion worth of taxpayers' money to save individuals problems and critically to save jobs and to save businesses. And that is at the root of some of our problems now. Having spent that 400 billion, it does leave a huge black hole. And that is why we've got to start unpopularly putting things right now. So I think we did the right thing during pandemic, but it did leave our finances in a fairly parlous state.
Sir Geoffrey Clinton-Brown, great to talk to you. Thanks for breaking into your Sunday to be with us here on GB News TV and Radio. Best to you as ever, and see you soon, I hope. Thank you very much indeed. Sir Geoffrey Clinton-Brown there, Conservative Member of Parliament for Cotswolds, former Minister, and importantly, member of the Public Accounts Committee, like Claire before him, being very, very open and very, very honest. They're politicians. Finally, in this session, I'm delighted to welcome one of my favourite economists, Julian Jessup. He's an independent economist, but he's also a former Treasury man. Just one question on the politics before we come on to the economics. I mean, I've been in the game a long, long time, but to hear someone like Claire, who's a Tory councillor and a former Tory special advisor, saying, I've never felt more gloomy, and Geoffrey Clinton-Brown saying, well, I haven't felt this gloomy since the 92-97 government that handed over power and a very healthy economy to Tony Blair for a decade. Blimey!
Well, I think that's a good point. I think at the end of the day, politics is often primarily about economics, and people are seeing headlines about, about recession. They're seeing headlines about interest rates going up, and now they're seeing headlines about tax increases and spending cuts. So there's a real danger that we damage what are called the animal spirits in the economy, business and consumer confidence, and we end up making a bad situation even worse.
The starting point then, because I follow you very closely, as you know, online and in pieces that you write as well. Do you share my worry that actually it's not quite as bad in terms of the numbers as the Treasury would have us believe? I mean, you recently wrote a piece pointing out how our debt and borrowing compares to the average of G7. And actually, we're in trouble, but we're not in the deepest of water ever.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. I mean, these numbers, 30, 40, 50 billion, that are being tossed around for the black hole, they're basically made up numbers. In particular, they depend on sort of 5-year forecasts for economic growth and inflation, and all sorts of assumptions in there about interest rates and commodity prices, particularly gas as well. They also assume some fiscal headroom in there of maybe 10 billion, which is basically the Treasury thinking of a number, then adding a bit more. And they're also based ultimately on fiscal rules the government itself makes up. If it had a different set of fiscal rules, it would come up with a different number for what that black hole is. So I think there's a danger here of the bean counters and abacus economics coming back again. We end up, setting policy now on the basis of assumptions and models that, frankly, are not very reliable.
Absolutely, 100%. Both assumptions, as it were, what Liz Truss used to call the Treasury orthodoxy, but just park that for a moment. But also another thing that you've written very powerfully and authoritatively about, and Liam Halligan bangs on about it too, is energy prices. There is an assumption of the price of energy within all of this at the moment that's actually falling, and it's falling quite fast. So the bailout may not be as costly as the Treasury is assuming, and yet they're still going to raise taxes and they're still going to cut public spending.
Yeah, exactly. I think there are two reasons for being cautious now. I mean, first is the economy is sliding into a recession. And it's worth stressing that those gloomy Bank of England forecasts didn't actually take account of the prospect of additional tax increases and spending cuts because the details aren't yet known. So now's a terrible time to be raising taxes and cutting spending. The second point is you've got all these extra uncertainties around the global economy and energy prices in particular. So it's very odd to have a sort of fixed view on what the deficit is going to be in several years' time, or the debt to GDP ratio, when you really don't know even what's going to happen over the next 3 to 6 months, particularly with things like energy prices. So I would be far more cautious than the Treasury is likely to be. But unfortunately, I'm rather in the wilderness at the moment, or the doghouse, and they're probably not going to take any notice of anything I'm going to say.
Oh, as we talked yesterday on the programme, the dangers of think tanks, but I think you are still listened to. And I was going to ask you about whether I'm right to be concerned about the dangers of raising taxes and cutting spending as far as the recession's concerned. But I'm going to end instead on just one very, very quick question to you, if I may. And that simply is you, as Julian Jessup, independent economist who knows the Treasury inside out. How gloomy are you, short and medium term?
Well, I'm not as gloomy as some. I think there are good reasons to think that the UK economy is pretty resilient. We actually saw that during the COVID lockdowns, that each time the economy bounced back more quickly than anticipated. I think there are good reasons to expect global inflation to fall a lot more quickly than some people fear. So I think personally the Chancellor's approach here should be what doctors are supposed to do. First, do no harm. And I think it does look like he's actually going to do harm by raising taxes and cutting spending before he has to, on the basis of some pretty dodgy assumptions.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Just what I'd hoped you would do, Julian. Thank you very much indeed. Julian Jessup there, independent economist, a man who knows how the Treasury works. Look carefully at those assumptions and don't do anything, Mr Sunak, that will further damage the economy. Mark says it's simple. We want a better health service and better schools, so hike those taxes, says Mark. We can only have what we're prepared to pay for. I'm concerned about the generations who've lived on benefits. Not necessarily their fault, but overall not the best use of resources. Mike says, tax rate rises, well, that's easy. Spending cuts are harder, but economic growth is what matters. They are out of control. That's just two, and I can promise you I've got pages and pages of them. Keep them coming in. GBViews at gbnews.uk, at GBNews on Twitter, or me directly or via Facebook. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we've plenty more coming up on today's programme on that theme. Plus, I'll be chatting to our political reporter with the very latest from Westminster, and that, I can tell you, is a very rich inbox. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the weather.
And looking ahead to this afternoon, the UK's looking set to see some sunshine, but scattered heavy showers also there too. Persistent rain clearing southeast. Let's look at that detail. Bright and sunny spells likely across the north of Scotland. Also 1 or 2 showers, fairly breezy as well there. And a similar picture expected across Northern Ireland, with a mix of bright spells and the occasional shower coupled with a brisk breeze. Across the northwest of England, the showers a little more widespread and locally on the heavy side, giving the risk of thunder in some places as well. Let's move over to North Wales. We're expected there to catch some quite heavy and locally perhaps thundery downpours, although a lot of those showers likely to move up towards the northwest, with Wrexham and Flintshire better placed to avoid them. Parts of the Midlands today likely to have persistent showers during the middle of the afternoon, although they will gradually be moving away to the east, brighter skies later on. And those showers transferring their way then to western parts of East Anglia. So although Norwich and parts of Suffolk do look dry, some wet weather expected elsewhere across the region. For the southern counties of England, a changeable afternoon, bright at times, a scattering of showers here and there, passing through a southwesterly wind. So heading into the evening then, many eastern areas becoming dry, clear spells, blustery showers continuing elsewhere, and that's how that very mixed weather picture is shaping up today.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello there, and the latest news this hour. Coming. Let's bring you the headlines then. And we're talking about COP26 today, and we're talking as well about the UK's Alok Sharma, who's handed over to COP27 in Egypt with an opening speech urging world leaders to take concrete steps and fast as well to tackle global warming, saying inaction will lead to climate catastrophe. The president of COP26, which was hosted last year in Glasgow, admitted that despite progress in the last year, the world is not on track to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees.
How many more wake-up calls do world leaders actually need? A third of Pakistan underwater, the worst flooding in Nigeria in a decade. This year, the worst drought in 500 years in Europe, in 1,000 years in the US, and the worst on record in China.
And nurses across the UK have for the first time voted in favour of national strike action in a dispute over pay. More than 300,000 members of the Royal College of Nursing were balloted. That's the biggest ever in the union's 106-year history. The walkouts are set to take place within a few weeks, possibly before Christmas, and it'll be likely that patients will face disruption to both surgical operations and appointments. National Highways has secured a High Court order to stop Just Stop Oil protesters from disrupting traffic on the M25. The order states that anyone entering the motorway, attaching themselves to any object or structure on it, or assisting others can be held in contempt of court. Protesters could face imprisonment, an unlimited fine, and the seizure of assets. And the Prime Minister has announced an extra bank holiday to mark the King's coronation next year. The holiday will take place on Monday the 8th of May, after His Majesty's coronation on the Saturday. Rishi Sunak says he looks forward to seeing people coming together and celebrating to pay tribute to King Charles III. That's it from me. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. Time now for more from Al.
Polly, thanks very much indeed. It has become blindingly obvious of late that a week in politics is a very long time, with news this morning of a proposed national nurses' strike. The ballot seems to be going in that direction. As you just heard in Polly's news bulletin, COP27 climate summit beginning in Egypt. And yes, Rishi Sunak either is there or will be there. And of course, today's political front page is a great deal to unpack. We have no better unpacker of these matters here at GB News TV and Radio than political correspondent Tom Harwood. Where do you want to start?
Well, it's interesting. It's not on the front page of any of the papers today, but it is leading the story in Westminster. And this is the scandal that is emerging around Gavin Williamson, Cabinet Minister without portfolio, who, it has been revealed, sent some texts to the former Chief Whip, Wendy Morton, that have been described as bullying. It's detailed in an investigation in the Sunday Times, where some of the texts are really quite nasty. And what this is all referring to is invitations to the Queen's funeral. Mr. Williamson seemed to be under the assumption that he was excluded as a Privy Council member from the funeral for political reasons. And he had a real go at the then Chief Whip.
In quite a threatening way. I take your point about the language, which was just inelegant and rude, but there's an air of threat about it as well.
Absolutely. One of the texts he sent said, well, let's see how many more times you F us over. There is a price for everything. Now, of course, Gavin Williamson himself is a former Chief Whip, known for keeping a tarantula called Kronos on his desk when he was there. Clearly, some of that threatening language has not been seen to be appropriate. But interestingly, Rishi Sunak is standing by Gavin Williamson this morning. The story has moved on in the sense that we now have the words from the government that the Prime Minister has confidence in Gavin Williamson. Now, opposition MPs are making the point that perhaps the Prime Minister's judgment is impaired. We learn that he was aware that there was a complaint brought against Gavin Williamson before appointing Gavin Williamson.
And unlike the Sunday Times' brilliant story about hacking internationally and globally, this is clearly a leak. I mean, these are people who don't like Gavin, who are feeding from WhatsApp or wherever,
or indeed
to the press,
people who don't like Rishi. In fact, there are some aggrieved former cabinet ministers who have been making less than subtle comments this morning, particularly Brandon Lewis, the former Northern Ireland secretary. He's been tweeting this morning about anti-bullying. Not immediately obviously connected to this, but some people have raised eyebrows as to what possibly could he be.
Nothing quite as dangerous as a sacked man. I'm delighted to see that you've also selected there the piece. There are ways of criticising prime ministers and indeed Chancellor of the Exchequer that are more subtle, and Duncan Smith plays a blinder.
He does.
By taking to his typewriter, doing a deal with the Sun newspaper and writing a piece with which I have to say is clear from the programme so far, I'm in big agreement.
Yes, this is a piece by Ian Duncan Smith in The Sun on Sunday, asking the question, do we really need these big tax rises, Mr. Chancellor, making the point that the United Kingdom is looking like it's going into its longest recession on record, a 2-year-long drop in economic activity that will not recover until after the next election. And the question is, will raising taxes on businesses and on consumers prolong or curtail that recession?
You were sitting there kindly before our conversation listening to Julian Jessup, independent economist who knows about these things. He used to work in the Treasury, and his answer to that question is it will make it worse. And they are doing it on the basis of faulty assumptions, which is a point that Ian also makes in the article. It ain't as bad as they're painting it.
Ian Duncan-Smith raising questions about whether there really is a 50 billion black hole in finances because of the variables. Now, one of the biggest variables is the price of energy. The government committed to this perhaps £150 billion policy of freezing everyone's energy bills. Now, that could be an incredibly huge expense for government and indeed for taxpayers if energy bills remain high. However, there's been some good news of the last couple of months, energy bills trickling down. Now, if they stay down, if the price of gas, the international price of gas, continues to fall or stay at a manageable level, this policy suddenly doesn't cost £150 billion. It could cost next to nothing. And that's a huge variable.
I'm going to be naughty and say, can we talk about nurses later on? Because you've kindly agreed to be around for the afternoon and pop back in. Because I just want to spend the last minute that we've got, because, again, you were listening to my earlier interviews. Park Jessup, just for a moment. It's Geoffrey Clinton-Brown, Treasurer of the 22 Committee, a towering figure from the Tory shires, and Claire Purcell, our mutual friend, former SPAD, Tory councillor, young thinker of Tory matters, both saying it's never been this bad for the Conservative Party in their memory. Geoffrey took us back to John Major, 92.
It's interesting looking at 92 because, of course, that's when the Conservative Party won a surprise victory, although things got a lot worse pretty quickly afterwards with Maastricht and the rest of it. But looking at opinion polls, in 1990, the month or a few months before Margaret Thatcher eventually was forced to resign as Prime Minister, the Conservatives were around 28 points behind in the polls. And 2 years later, they won a small majority against all expectations. Well, the next election is 2 years away. The polls show us that the Tories are around 25 points behind. I suppose the calculation that many Conservatives will have made is that changing leader might well be able to pull that same trick off again. But my gosh, is there a mountain to climb?
Absolutely. Always good to talk to you, and look forward to talking to you again a bit later on. Nurses and whatever else has happened.
COP27, I think.
COP27, yes, good. Going to do a deal with Macron about the channel, apparently. It's all intriguing.
Lots of international affairs.
And I think I said Geoffrey Clinton-Brown. It's Geoffrey Clifton-Brown. My apologies to you and, more importantly, to Sir Geoffrey. Tom, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Talk to you again a wee bit later on. Tom Harwood there, GB News political reporter. And as I say, he will be back later on. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends, with plenty more still to come this afternoon, including COP27, as Tom was just saying. It kicks off in Egypt today. After some uncertainty over his attendance, it's been confirmed that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will indeed be there. So what does that mean for the UK and its attempts to tackle the climate crisis? First, a quick break.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
She's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate, and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for big guests, big opinions, and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. It's exactly 17 minutes to 1. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News. You've been busy. Judith says, where's the plan for growth? All Sunak offers is managed decline. Austerity is not the answer. And Dave says, there's nothing left in public services to cut. Keep those thoughts coming in, and we'll try and find time as the programme progresses towards 2 o'clock to read yet more of them out. Now, the willy-won't-y about Rishi Sunak's attendance at COP27 in Egypt was resolved. He will attend. But why? The UK is already a committed world leader in reducing carbon emissions and supporting renewable energy. So, is he going to gloat, to lean on others who are doing less well? Good luck with China and India, by the way. The Mail says that he's going to talk to Emmanuel Macron about a new deal on people in small boats crossing the Channel. It is the nature of these international jamborees. So we wanted to dig a little deeper into what it might be all about, and therefore are delighted to be joined now by John Flesher, who's International Programme Director at Conservative Environment Network. It's an independent forum for conservatives who support net zero, nature restoration and resource security. I underlined and said the word conservative quite loudly to A, let people know who you are, where you're coming from, but also you know what made Rishi change his mind and finally decide to go. Does it matter to you that he's there?
It does. I think Rishi Sunak's presence as the Prime Minister says something about the UK's position on these issues. I mean, he's not going as any old world leader. He's going as the country who has held the COP presidency for the last 3 years now. And I think it says something about the UK's role that as we hand that presidency on to Egypt, we're proud of what we've achieved. And I think the UK has achieved a lot in that time, but we need to make sure that that action is kept up. And you made the point about other countries. I think that's exactly what he needs to be doing when he's there. He needs to be leaning on the countries that haven't done as much as the UK and say, this is what we need to achieve, build on the UK's record. There's a huge amount to achieve there and a huge amount of progress that's been made, but a huge amount more that needs to be made in addition to that.
Yeah, principally by others, whereas there are other huge crises, and it's the main theme of our programme today on the economy at home. And the Observer newspaper makes the point that given the economic challenges that we all face, Sunak's initial decision to stay and work on that autumn statement was widely applauded. Now he's decided, no, I've done enough on that so I can go and do COP27. It also looks like one or two of the other papers have said as well as a kind of flip-flop. I mean, it's not the most impressive action, even if you applaud it.
I think, if I may say, you're being a little unkind on the Prime Minister there. I think in his
It's
defense,
my job.
Well, it is. It certainly is. That's very true. But I think I don't think it's a flip-flop, but I completely take your point about the importance of domestic economic matters. And I think what's really, really important that we get out of this summit and his attendance at this summit is making the link between those two situations. The reason we've got sky-high energy bills in this country, the reason why inflation's running riot, not just in the UK, but across Europe and across the world, is because of the price of debt and the price of fossil fuels. And I think the message he needs to be making when he's going there, and I'm encouraged by the comments he's already briefed on this is the right time, not just for climate change, but for the economy to be going hell for leather for supporting wind, for supporting solar, to reduce that dependency on fossil fuels, which are so volatile in price and can be controlled by regimes, not just Russia, but regimes that we have, say the least, plenty of criticisms of. And this is a great opportunity to say, no, for economic and for climate reasons, let's move away from that towards renewables. And I hope and believe that's what his message is going to be this week.
I noted, and I was listening very, very carefully, that you didn't say nuclear in that analysis, and there is talk about Sizewell C perhaps being paused or even cancelled. I think more likely paused than cancelled in the November 17 budget. And we haven't heard a lot recently about those mini nuclear power stations that we know are on the drawing board at Rolls-Royce, ready to go, and they can be put up much sooner. I mean, as a Conservative, wouldn't you like to be leaning on Mr Hunt and Mr Sunak for a bit more action on that as well?
I'm certainly supportive of nuclear. No objections to that from our organisation. I think what I'd say is we need an approach that says all forms of zero carbon energy are ones we should be looking at and ones we should be pursuing more aggressively. And I think nuclear absolutely is going to be part of that over the coming years. I think there are criticisms of nuclear not on environmental grounds, but I think the real challenge with nuclear is about how we can drive the costs down and make sure that it's not adding more to people's bills. And I think one of the real appeals of wind and solar is that actually they've come down so much in cost over the last decade that they can be a really, really integral part of cutting people's energy bills, which is, as you pointed out, domestically at least the important challenge at the moment.
John Flesher, really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope that we may be able to find another spot, because I know COP27 goes on for a wee while, and maybe we can touch base again as it progresses and see how Sunak's got on, and equally how your group have got on there. But for the time being, thank you very much indeed, John. Thanks for finding time for us, and have a successful conference. John Flesher there, International Programme Director at the Conservative Environment Network, saying he welcomes Sunak because we in Britain have a good story to tell, and he can use his status as a world leader to lean on the others to get in behind us and do the right stuff as well. We were talking earlier about the need for more post-Brexit trade deals as well in the context of the budget and boosting the economy and all the rest of it. But one trade deal that was on the drawing board with Brazil now looks unlikely amid strained ties between the recently re-elected Lula administration and this Tory government. Catherine McBride is a fellow at the Centre for Brexit Policy and joins me live. Great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Going way back on this programme, we've often had Penny Mordaunt on the show when she was involved with international trade, talking about the vital importance of trade deals post-Brexit. Control of borders and laws, that's all one thing, but there's a big hole to fill economically. How big a blow is Brazil if it does now fall off the agenda for overtly political reasons?
Well, I think that the politics, if you read the story that was published in The Eye, is not quite as it sounds. It's not about Lula not getting on with the Conservatives. It's about the fact that the UK has not changed its legislation on imports of agricultural products since we left the EU. And there is actually a quote that says something to the effect of, despite Brexit, the UK still has EU regulations. Now, the EU actually did a trade deal with the Mercosur countries, which are the 5 big countries in South America, except that now Venezuela has been suspended from that agreement. Mercosur is a trade deal with Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. Now, 3 of those are some of the world's biggest beef producers. But just when the deal was finalised, both Ireland and France suddenly decided that they had an environmental issue with Brazil, and so they couldn't sign it. But in fact, I think the real problem they had with Brazil was the fact that Brazil is a very efficient producer of meat. It has massive beef farms. It has 2 things that the UK doesn't have. I mean, to be successful in farming these days and to export farm products, you need to have either a very cheap economy, very low currency, very competitive economy, or you need to be like the US, very, very efficient and have the highest productivity.
Yeah.
Now, Brazil has both of those things. It has
let me butt in because I want to tie one thing you said there with what I want. No, it's fine. But you've also got to have a very compliant agricultural sector. And here in the UK, we've got a very vociferous National Farmers Union saying, no, we don't want these cheap imports undercutting us. And the French are exactly the same. I mean, consumers would love cheaper beef, but farmers don't want it.
Well, that is the problem. The real benefits from free trade is not from what you can export, it's from what you can import. And we are happy to import mobile phones, computers, shoes, clothes, all sorts of things that we used to make here. And we happily import those. But for some reason, we have a lobby group from the National Farmers Union who are embedded in all sorts of government departments and Whitehall, and they are preventing any of these trade deals happening. And that is a real problem. And we've already signed trade deals with Australia and New Zealand, neither of which have come into force yet, because the New Zealand one hasn't even gone through the CRAG process. The Australian one has, but it probably won't be finalised until the start of next year. But you will read in any kind of rag that the NFU has is pumping stories into that farmers are being undercut by cheap imports of meat. Well, that's not possible through the trade deals. They haven't started yet. This is just rubbish being pushed out by a group of very, very inefficient farmers. And it's not all UK farmers. Our dairy farmers are fantastic and they make large profits. And you can look this up. The ONS publishes statistics on farm income by type, and they break it all down into where they get their income from and which sort of farm. So dairy farms are great, cereal farms, crop farms, they're all good. The real loser in our industry is the beef farms.
All right, Catherine, we have to leave it there, but let me just say that we always do Rural Spotlight on this programme, and we've spoken to dairy farmers, and I echo exactly what you just said. Beef farmers, we will revisit, and I may ask you to come back again and perhaps engage with a beef farmer. That would be great. But for the time being, Catherine McBride, real pleasure talking to you, and great to hear your views. Catherine is a fellow at the Centre for Brexit Policy, and how refreshing to hear an informed person picking holes in what still needs to be done to make Brexit work, rather than just ranting and saying it's all dreadful and a failure. We'll have her back on. Now, how early do you start getting festive? Well, in Birmingham, their Christmas market's already open, and with millions expected to visit over the next few weeks, we also spend our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, to find out what the buzz is like. Jack.
Birmingham's Christmas market is back for 2022. And as the most visited authentic German market outside of Germany and Austria, millions come to visit here from around the UK and Europe. For Birmingham, that means a huge stimulation to the local economy.
So we've been welcoming the Frankfurt Christmas market here to Birmingham since 1997. Adds around about £250 million worth of extra commerce over the Christmas period, supports about 7,000 jobs, and we get about 5 million visitors come to the city every year. And it's a lot of fun. It's one of the best things about the Christmas period here in Birmingham. We need some things to cheer us up right now, don't we? Things are very, very grim. And, German market comes here every year, brings some festive cheer to the city and helps support the local economy.
To put on a market like this, though, requires energy, and higher prices have impacted the cost visitors will pay.
We paid in the past for 1 litre about 40 pence. Now it is £2.20. The product's a little bit more expensive than before, and it's all over. I think people will accept this.
Last year, day visitors spent an average of £58 per person. But what is it about the market that they love?
Just a beer and a sausage.
I think it's just like the variety of stuff you can get. Like you can get like bottomless drink, you can get like donuts, you can get sausages, there's so much to get. And everyone's in like a happy mood, so yeah.
It's the 22nd year of the market here in Birmingham, and from hot chocolate to hot dogs, it's hard to not get into the Christmas spirit. And as day turns to night, people flood the town square to enjoy a drink and catch up with friends. Even in darker financial times, Birmingham's German market is providing some light to people's lives this Christmas. Jack Carson, GB News.
And indeed you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends, including our brilliant network of reporters here on GB News TV and radio. We've lots more coming up on the programme this afternoon, including we'll have more on our top discussion. Where would you make the budget cuts to balance the books, or perhaps you wouldn't? Maybe like Judith, you say that there's no plan for growth. Austerity is not the answer. Whoa! More at the top of the hour, but first let's bring you up to date with the weather.
And looking ahead to this afternoon, the UK's looking set to see some sunshine, but scattered heavy showers also there too. Persistent rain clearing southeast. Let's look at that detail. Bright and sunny spells likely across the north of Scotland. Also 1 or 2 showers, fairly breezy as well there. And a similar picture expected across Northern Ireland, with a mix of bright spells and the occasional shower, coupled with a brisk breeze. Across the northwest of England, the showers a little more widespread and locally on the heavy side, giving the risk of thunder in some places as well. Let's move over to North Wales. We're expected there to catch some quite heavy and locally perhaps thundery downpours, although a lot of those showers likely to move up towards the northwest, with Wrexham and Flintshire better placed to avoid them. Parts of the Midlands today likely to have persistent showers during the middle of the afternoon, although they will gradually be moving away to the east, brighter skies later on. And those showers transferring their way then to western parts of East Anglia. So although Norwich and parts of Suffolk do look dry, some wet weather expected elsewhere across the region. For the southern counties of England, a changeable afternoon, bright at times, a scattering of showers here and there, passing through a southwesterly wind. So heading into the evening then, many eastern areas becoming dry, clear spells, blustery showers continuing elsewhere, and that's how that very mixed weather picture is shaping up today.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello and welcome back. The time is 1 minute past 1. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio. Welcome if you've just joined us for the final hour. Hello again if you've been kind enough to be with us since noon. We'll be keeping you company here on TV and radio with lots more to come. More on our top subject and a lot of thoughts from you on how you try and balance that budget or just take a deep breath and move on. We've got two top guests here. Claire's back and Elliot Kecker's joined me now as well. We'll also be talking about cheaper food for you, which is great news as well, but it also helps the environment. So all of that to come and more right up to 2 o'clock. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the other news so far today. Here's Polly Middlehurst.
Alastair, thank you, and good afternoon to you. The top story on GB News today. The UK's Alok Sharma has handed over to COP27 in Egypt with an opening speech urging world leaders to take concrete steps and fast to tackle global warming, saying inaction will lead to climate catastrophe. The president of the COP26 summit, which was hosted last year in Glasgow, admitted that despite progress in the last year, the world is not on track to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees.
How many more wake-up calls do world leaders actually need? A third of Pakistan underwater, the worst flooding in Nigeria in a decade. This year, the worst drought in 500 years in Europe, in 1,000 years in the US, and the worst on record in China.
And the Prime Minister will be at COP27. He'll be pledging to make the UK a clean energy superpower when he addresses the summit tomorrow, urging all countries to move away from fossil fuels. He's going to warn that tackling global warming is fundamental to future prosperity and security. He'll also argue that the shock in oil and gas markets caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine highlights the need to move to cheaper and cleaner sources of energy. Well, our other top story on GB News today, nurses across the UK have, for the first time, voted in favour of national strike action in a dispute over pay. More than 300,000 members of the Royal College of Nursing were balloted. That's the biggest ever in the union's 106-year history. The walkouts are set to take place within a few weeks, possibly before Christmas, and it's likely patients will face disruption to surgical operation and appointments. The government could revive the British Bill of Rights in a bid to tackle the number of migrants crossing the English Channel in small boats. The legislation would give the UK courts supremacy over the European Court of Human Rights, preventing judges in Strasbourg interfering in government policy, including sending migrants to Rwanda for processing. The bill was shelved by the former Prime Minister, Liz Truss, but the Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, said its return would end the abuse of UK law. And National Highways has secured a High Court order to ban Just Stop oil protesters from disrupting traffic on the M25. The order states that anyone entering the motorway, attaching themselves to any object or structure on it, or assisting others can be held in contempt of court. Protesters could face imprisonment, an unlimited fine, and the seizure of assets. At least 3 people have been killed after a passenger plane crashed into Lake Victoria in Tanzania. Rescue boats, emergency workers and bystanders have been helping to pull passengers to safety. 15 have been rescued so far. Precision Air is Tanzania's largest privately owned airline. Local media reports the plane was trying to land at the city of Bukoba in stormy weather. The country's president has called for calm as the rescue operation continues. And staying abroad, New York City's fire department says it's dealt with its 200th fire this year, caused by a lithium battery. At least 38 people were injured in an apartment building fire, believed to have been caused by an electric scooter. Video shows firefighters rescuing residents from the 20th floor of the burning building. 2 people in a critical condition in hospital and 5 others are seriously injured. Tickets for Glastonbury 2023 went on release today and sold out within an hour. The site initially experienced a few technical problems, continuously crashing under the weight of demand. Tickets sell for Glastonbury at about £350 each. Twitter has launched a subscription service that allows users to buy the blue tick verification symbol next to their name for a monthly fee of £7. Self-styled chief twit and new owner of the social media site, Elon Musk, has implemented the new measure to stop Twitter losing money. The company lost almost £195 million last year. The blue tick verification system was previously used to identify authentic or influential users on the platform. And lastly, the Prime Minister has announced an extra bank holiday to mark the King's coronation next year. The holiday will take place on Monday the 8th of May, after His Majesty's coronation on the Saturday. Rishi Sunak says he looks forward to seeing people coming together and celebrating to pay tribute to King Charles III. More news as it happens. Now back to Al Stewart and friends.
Polly, thanks very much indeed. So, on November the 17th, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt will deliver his autumn statement, his tax-raising, spending-cutting package to get the UK out of the fiscal black hole that he says we find ourselves in. The Prime Minister said that the state can't fix all of your problems, but what cuts should be made. I asked for your comments, and you have been very, very busy. Pete says, I'm past concern now, Al. Thank you. I like that. I can't have any say in what happens, so I'm just going to concentrate on my family. Naz says, I'd love to see the Prime Minister say no to his salary. I'm sure Trump did that, as he had his own fortune. That would save some money and maybe less spent on major trips for high-profile officials. Also, maybe stop paying other countries money that we can ill afford. Chrissy says the thing is that some have already been cut back. There is no fat left, just lean. Gary says priorities change. So available funds should be targeted appropriately. Outcomes should drive funding decisions for government spending, not existing budgets, plus the money. Put the money where it will deliver the optimum value for all and dump the pet projects and quangos. And finally, Elizabeth says, Rishi got us into this mess with his mismanagement of the economy, and now he wants to tax us to fill up his little black hole. I'm delighted to say that Claire Purcell is still with us, listening to those and reflecting upon it. Setting Pete to one side, because I kind of sympathise a little bit with you. I've talked far too much. I've got my wife, my partner, my kids to worry about. But Elizabeth, Rishi got us into the mess with his mismanagement when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now he wants to tax us to fill up his black hole. Elizabeth speaks for a lot of people who've been commenting.
I think she does, and I can understand the level of anger people like Elizabeth have when they were told we had to spend this money as a country, and remember, this is taxpayers' money that the government is spending, and now it is the middle of the income brackets who are the ones who are going to be taxed more heavily to pay for it without having any say in the matter. So I can understand that. I think you need to perhaps not blame just the Chancellor. It would have been a government decision. Yeah. So the Cabinet would have resolved that budget. So I don't think you can point the finger in solely
but like that famous television programme, Names in the Frames. That was the other one I wanted to comment, a quick comment on, and then it takes me very neatly to Elliot Keck, who's sitting next to you. Gary's comment. Priorities change, perfectly reasonable. You made the point earlier on at 12 o'clock about departmental budgets are historically very tricky. They become set in concrete almost. But Gary says outcomes should drive funding decisions for government spending, not existing budgets. Put the money where it will deliver the optimum value for all and dump the pet projects. That's the knife I want to see taken to it. Don't just assume everything's hunky-dory and we keep going as we've always gone.
But I think the problem is what you consider to be the most important priorities, because if you ask people, they will have different views, whether it be motorways, whether it be power stations, whether it be hospitals, schools, defence. Everybody has different priorities. So I think it is an interesting point, and I don't wish that people stop doing that. I really want to hear more ideas, but it's very, very difficult to suggest which one has the better outcome when you don't necessarily see it.
All right, perfect entree to Elliot Keck, who I've mentioned twice and is sitting there quietly and snuck in at the top of the hour, which is excellent. Elliot's an old mate of mine. He's the investigations campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance and therefore is, in many respects, perfectly qualified to answer that final point. But let me add, by way of an intro to it, Taxpayers Alliance famously produced a couple of years ago, rather like Peter Lilly, a little list of where public spending could be cut, and quite brutally in one or two areas, without harming services to the people who pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. So this was our Save to Spend document. So the idea is that you look across the public sector and look at areas where actually potentially you have a unsustainable government spending, and you bring that down in order to ensure that the core public services are
Net
kept.
zero budgeting, I think you also called it.
Yeah, so that's another really interesting idea that speaks to this idea of measuring outcomes. So zero-based budgeting is the idea of, rather than assuming the budget and then looking at whether or not it needs to go down or needs to go up, you start from zero, and then you require Whitehall officials to look at the whole range of projects and things that their department does, and look, what do we need to do?
Let me interject at that point then, and feel free to come in as well, Claire, because Claire and I talked about that at midday when we started the programme. And having been in the game for a long time, I know what she means when she says, look, you get a departmental budget and what it tries to do and what it doesn't try to do is almost set in concrete, and amounts go up and down, but mainly they go up. It seemed to me that what you were saying is nobody's had an open-minded, open-hearted look at that for a long time. I would say not since Peter Lilly and Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. And the problem is whenever you have new areas of government spending, you have new interest groups that believe that that area of government spending is more important than any other. But if you just look at, I mean, just any individual project, the amount that will be spent on just pure administration, which doesn't actually even achieve the project's aims, and you do wonder if you can just return that money to taxpayers, I mean, how much better that will be.
Is that an entree to common ground? You're nodding.
I am, because when you look at something like HS2, which has been one of these great big battlegrounds for the party, and the amount that was spent just on administration costs for it, which took it sort of 4, 5, 6 times over budget. Now, if a business did that, it would quite rightly just go bust. And if you are going
they
to
wouldn't
see that
last a day under Gary's outcomes
absolutely,
measure.
and I think Gary's probably quite right. So I do see the actual benefit in that. I think it's quite difficult when you come to some of the departments, again, where outcomes aren't necessarily obvious. And I think that's the real difficulty, is that not every department is the same, and you can't use the sort of broad brush, let's start from zero. And I do understand it, and I think it would work in some places. I would like to see that in the NHS, which is also that very tricky conversation. But it wouldn't necessarily work in education so much. Which is very, very difficult, and then also partly statutory responsibilities that they have as a department. So I think it's really tricky.
My producer is telling me in my ear that we haven't had anybody emailing or tweeting saying cut education, but we've had an army of people saying, look at the NHS, it shouldn't be ring-fenced. These are people, I'm guessing, who are on those dreadful waiting lists.
Yeah, I mean, and Claire mentions HS2, and HS2 is a really, really interesting one. It's going to cost tens and tens and tens of billions.
Slightly blurred by my NIMBY, not in my backyard. I'd love to have a high-speed train up north, but not if it goes past my back door.
But again, that speaks to priorities, and the position that we take on HS2, for example, is not actually that it's incorrect to spend that sort of money on transportation. It's a vital part of the public realm. But actually, is that 40, 50, 60 billion pounds, however much it will end up costing, really best spent on a train from London to Birmingham and then to Manchester, when it could be spent on rail networks across the country?
I want to take you back to some of the fundamentals, and I don't think you'd arrived, but we had the brilliant Julian Jessup on earlier on, who was really profoundly worried about the assumptions underlying this budget on the 17th of November, not least the falling price of energy, which you've mentioned, not least the fact that actually mortgage rates that went way are now beginning to do that very slightly, and it's a global problem. But he was crystal clear. Get this wrong, either on the level of taxation going up, or the wrong cuts in public spending, and it may include HS2, the Northern Powerhouse Rail and things like that, and you're going to drive this economy deeper and longer into recession.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, fiscal responsibility has to be demonstrated on November the 17th, but if that is...
Fiscal, just for folk at home who may not be familiar, fiscal is basically, it's about tax and spending.
And tax.
Monetary is about interest rates.
Yeah, exactly, but there is absolutely a risk that if the government panic, if they look at this £50 billion figure and think it's absolutely set in stone, then they could do things that enormously damage the economy, and one of the top things is going to be increasing corporation tax from 19p to 25p, which will severely diminish our international competitiveness in terms of the ability of business to operate and make profit.
Claire used to be a special advisor, and ministers bring people in to guide them through technical complexities of policy, as well as doing that on the political wind, and it's a really important function. The Taxpayers Alliance has had influence in the past with the Conservative Party in government. The Institute of Economic Affairs had huge influence with Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, and you, to a lesser extent, but you were in that same group. Are you now all dead in the water? Has that radical, fresh thinking, no-holds-barred approach gone?
I think, listen, we've always just tried to do our best. I mean, it was interesting people spoke about the influence that some organisations had over the Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng administration, but one of their first announcements when they came in was an energy package that was uncapped and unlinked to how much you earn, and that was going to cost about potentially as much as £150 billion. That's now been obviously significantly graded downwards. But nevertheless, I mean, listen, we're always just going to be here trying to make the argument that government needs to address its priorities and ensure it's not balancing the books on the backs of taxpayers.
Well, absolutely. And as I said in my introduction right at the very top, and a final point for both of you to comment upon, it not just taxpayers, but also on the backs of the poorest. And Andrew Rawnsley, who we all know, very brilliant journalist in The Observer, left of centre, undoubtedly, no doubt about that at all, says, A, if all of these measures that have been leaked happen, then the economy will be driven deeper into recession, so much so that he'd be very surprised if Labour really wanted to win the next general election. It's that bad.
Well, sure. I think that's absolutely the case. And whenever the economy goes into recession, it's the poorest that are hit the most. So absolutely, the government needs to take whatever measures it can, and they need to be pro-growth measures to avoid that scenario.
Yeah. In terms of listening, have we moved on from that point? I said at the top that it's said in the newspapers, whether it's true or not, but these things are normally leaked, that the first full draft of these measures will be going to the Office of Budget Responsibility, which of course featured in the huge row over the Liz Truss Kwasi Kwarteng budget back whenever it was. So if a full draft is going to be arriving for them to put their slide rule across starting tonight and tomorrow, don't let me sound cynical, but is there almost any point in us having these conversations saying, hey, hang on, have you thought about so-and-so? And have you really thought this through? Is it a done deal, do you reckon, at this juncture, Claire?
No, I don't think it is. And departmental budgets and cost comparisons need to be in by tomorrow. So it certainly isn't a done deal. And I would just like to point out that leaking the worst-case scenario has been something that the Treasury has done for decades and decades. If you put it out there, it is going to be absolutely awful. When it's not quite as awful as that, then whichever political party will take it as a win. So I don't buy all of it that's coming out, and I don't think it is a done deal. Plus, it has to get through the House of Commons and be scrutinised properly. So it's not a done deal yet, but I suspect that some of that is definitely true.
Let me pick out a couple of the things that Claire said there to give you the final say on it. And I love the point about leaking. Just try it and see what the public reaction to it. And we've seen an element of that already on capital gains tax. It was kind of a kite was flown and then semi-officially shot down. In my mind, because it's about economic philosophy and fiscal philosophy as much as balancing the books, is thresholds. That if that freeze in the amount of money that you, I, Claire and everybody else can earn before we pay any tax, and the point at which we start paying 45% tax, if that's frozen for another couple of years, it will yield a lot of money, but it's going to make higher rate taxpayers out of millions of people, and I think it disincentivises hard work and effort. Do you reckon that that's a kite being flown, or do you expect that to be there on the 17th of November?
I am absolutely concerned about the freeze of those thresholds. I mean, at every single threshold, you have problems. At the 12,500, you have a problem that if you don't raise it in line with inflation, you're going to hit the poorest. But actually, at the 50,000 level, something that's been frozen for a long time, you're now dragging, completely ordinary people, that doctors, teachers, and the like into that much higher rate of tax, which was originally designed for only those.
I mean, the higher rate is senior nurses, ward sisters, sergeants in the police, junior ranks in the Army, Navy and Air Force.
And then
utterly, I mean, at least under the Trades Descriptions Act, they should review it.
Yes, completely, yeah.
Would you say that was your main number one concern?
Well, I mean, certainly if they freeze the lowest rate of tax, given the rate of inflation, that would be a disaster for the poorest in society, and I really hope they don't do it.
Extraordinary. Claire, thank you very much indeed for coming back. You're welcome any time, as indeed are you, Elliot. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And through you, thanks to your team who sent me those two links on the 20 tips and also the net zero budgeting. We'll have you both back any time that you can fit us in. Thank you both very much indeed. Elliot Keck, their investigations campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, and Claire Purcell, who I've described and explained who she is far too many times, and so we'll save her blushes. But she'll be back again ere long, have no doubt at all. Now, listening to all of that, I hope very much indeed, was another old mate of mine, Khalid Mahmood, who is the Labour Member of Parliament for Birmingham Perry Barr. Khalid, how are you?
Very good, thank you, Alastair. How are you?
I'm very well indeed, and it's great to see you. I hate people who say we're not balanced. We always try and have balance, and you are a regular Labour MP who says, yep, I'm very happy to come on and talk about it. So let me start with quite a tough one, but it's meant to set the ground for our conversation. The Labour Party keeps saying that the Conservatives crashed the economy, but surely you would accept something we've talked about all afternoon. Energy prices are global, as is inflation, and higher interest rates are that way as well. Don't you have to up your game in the criticism of what this government is doing and the explanation of why we're in difficulties?
Well, I'll say, look, first of all, what I'd like to say is what Elliot was saying and talking about in terms of the Taxpayers Alliance. What they need to do is they need to, first of all, investigate all of the corruption during COVID, the unusable PPE, the test and trace money that was lost in Nightingale hospitals that was set up and they never used, and what happened to them, what happened to the cost of them, what happened to the materials used in them, and what decisions were taken there. So first of all, Rishi Sunak's record, whilst we all appreciate the furlough funding that he put in, there was almost 15 billion pounds that was lost through not investigating frauds and PPE purchases which were not usable to do that. So I think that's first of all. Secondly, in relation to your question, I think it's important for us to look at how this government has dealt with all of this. It has dealt with this mini budget that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng came in on a wild charge of trying to say free for all. But above all that, go back to Brexit as well. 1 million vacancies in our markets at the moment was huge. And that would add up to a huge amount of taxation if we were to do that right. So, yes, there are other issues apart from what you raised, and we just look at all those as well.
I didn't interrupt that because it's a very fair and crisp analysis, and I accept a lot of it, not all of it. But I tell you what, in terms of what you would do, and I hear the criticism that you've made of Rishi as Chancellor and Rishi as Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, your leader, had the golden opportunity at party conference to give us a clearer idea of what he'd be doing on the economy. And in what I personally thought was a powerful speech, it was all about more spending on doctors, nurses, police officers, education. That was what the plan was. Andrew Rawnsley says in The Observer, second time I've mentioned Andrew, but I know you will have read it, he says that if the Tories do now what they're planning to do, the economy will be in such a state that you guys wouldn't want to inherit it. You will not be able to do any of that unless you raise taxes even more. Do you really want that?
Well, yes, we want to be able to serve the country. We want to be able to serve the people. We want to be able to serve the most vulnerable people in society, which this government hasn't done and is not doing that. What has been proposed by Rachel Reeves, our Shadow Chancellor, is to look at issues around the windfall tax, which hasn't been properly put in yet at the moment. There's the non-dom funding, which needs to be looked at as well, which hasn't come through. So the significant other funding that needs to come in. And of course, the issue of those with the broadest shoulders bearing the broadest of the loads is an issue in terms of direct taxation and not taxing those people that are not prepared or able to do that, which is across the board, which is what the Tories are proposing.
One final point, and we touched upon it with the other guests as well, and that is the National Health Service, which Keir spoke a great deal about at the party conference. This government, this Tory government, says it's ring-fenced, it will have what it needs, there are going to be no cuts there for the NHS. Wes Streeting, your shadow health secretary, intrigued me when he said there is a need for urgent structural reform of the NHS before the signing of the chequebook begins. Does that mean that reform would be a condition of improved funding for the NHS if your party forms the next government?
Well, I think one of the key things we're going to look at is the internal market that Maggie Thatcher brought into the National Health Service, and yet we haven't fully. We're stuck by the shackles of that at the moment. So in terms of what Wes is saying is right, but in no way will Wes say that we need to cut funding from the National Health Service. He knows the desperate need. I myself know the desperate need. I had a kidney transplant in 2014, and I'm here because of the great work of the National Health Service and all the people involved, from consultants to nurses and to all the staff that work there.
All right, Khalid, again, thank you for joining us. I always enjoy our conversations. Thanks for breaking into your Sunday afternoon. Hope you have a great weekend and look forward to talking to you again soon. Khalid Mahmood there, who is the Labour Member of Parliament for Birmingham Perry Barr, with his criticisms, but also one or two proposals of what he and his party would do if they were to win the next general election. We've plenty more to come in the remaining half hour of Alastair Stewart and Friends, taking you right up to 2 o'clock. After the break, as promised, Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, will be back. We'll be talking about nurses' strikes and other matters, and COP27 as well. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
And looking ahead to this afternoon, the UK's looking set to see some sunshine, but scattered heavy showers also there too. Persistent rain clearing southeast. Let's look at that detail. Bright and sunny spells likely across the north of Scotland. Also 1 or 2 showers. Fairly breezy as well there. And a similar picture expected across Northern Ireland, with a mix of bright spells and the occasional shower coupled with a brisk breeze. Across the northwest of England, the showers a little more widespread and locally on the heavy side, giving the risk of thunder in some places as well. Let's move over to North Wales. We're expected there to catch some quite heavy and locally perhaps thundery downpours, although a lot of those showers likely to move up towards the northwest, with Wrexham and Flintshire better placed to avoid them. Parts of the Midlands today likely to have persistent showers during the middle of the afternoon, although they will gradually be moving away to the east, brighter skies later on. And those showers transferring their way then to western parts of East Anglia. So although Norwich and parts of Suffolk do look dry, some wet weather expected elsewhere across the region. For the southern counties of England, a changeable afternoon, bright at times, a scattering of showers here and there, passing through a southwesterly wind. So heading into the evening then, many eastern areas becoming dry, clear spells, blustery showers continuing elsewhere, and that's how that very mixed weather picture is shaping up today.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
You're with GB News, Alastair Stewart and friends back in just a moment. First, let's bring you up to date with the latest news headlines. And in the last few moments, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, has made a speech at the meeting of the party in London. He criticised the Conservatives as the party of chaos and said it's time for a general election.
After inflicting so much chaos, the Conservatives want the rest of us to pay to clear up their mess. They're already talking about more unfair tax rises, more cuts to pensions and benefits, more cuts to schools, the police, even our NHS. All to fill the hole they themselves created. It's like they robbed our bank and now they're asking us for a loan to buy their getaway car. Well, we say no. Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, instead of inflicting even more pain on struggling families and pensioners, it's time to start helping. Put a proper windfall tax on the blood oil profits of the fossil fuel giants. Reverse your tax cuts for the big banks. They are unfair and unnecessary. And use those extra billions to give people real help with energy bills, to protect pensions and benefits from inflation, to safeguard schools, hospitals and councils from cuts, and to help homeowners struggling to pay that Conservative property penalty.
Sir Ed Davey speaking in central London at the opening of the Lib Dem conference. Well, also in the news today, the UK's Alok Sharma has handed over to COP27 in Egypt with an opening speech urging world leaders to take concrete steps and fast to tackle global warming, saying inaction will lead to climate catastrophe. The president of the COP26 summit, which was hosted in Glasgow last year, admitted that despite progress in the past year, the world is not on track to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees. And the Prime Minister has announced an extra bank holiday to mark the King's coronation next year. The holiday will take place on Monday, the 8th of May, after His Majesty's coronation on the Saturday. Rishi Sunak says he looks forward to seeing people coming together and celebrating and paying tribute to King Charles III. Those are your headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News, the People's Channel. Back now to Al Stewart and friends.
Polly, thanks very much indeed. We were talking earlier on about that COP27 climate summit starting in Egypt today that featured in Polly's news. But who's been arriving, which speakers should we be looking out for? And also at the top of Polly's news there, literally in the last few moments, the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, Sir Ed Davey, has been giving a speech in Westminster focusing in on exactly the subject that we've been talking about, that budget in November. A little later on, November the 17th. As promised, I'm delighted to be rejoined by political correspondent Tom Harwood. We'd said we wanted to talk about COP27 and also, if we've got time, nurses. But Davey putting the boot in there. No fresh new ideas, windfall tax again. But it struck me a much more upbeat Ed Davey than I've heard for a wee while.
Certainly, and he began his speech by saying that this was the speech he was meant to give around 47 days ago, because, of course, the Liberal Democrats cancelled their conference in the wake of the death of Her Majesty the Queen. He started with a little gag in his speech, saying that in modern British political parlance, that would be called one Liz Truss, that length of 47 days. But yes, some pre-announced policy in that speech too, particularly this new policy that the Lib Dems want to give of cash handouts to homeowners who may be struggling with their mortgages, really focusing in on that blue wall electoral strategy. Davey boasting of the 3 by-election wins they've had against Conservative MPs with huge majorities. And it looks like the Liberal Democrats now are focusing entirely on taking out Conservative MPs, particularly in the South.
Yeah, and recent by-elections have shown that in the right circs they can do it. The other thing that struck me listening to Ed there is, and I've heard it with leading Labour figures, and that's why I started my conversation with Khalid Mahmood a moment ago. This is an economic crisis made in Downing Street. Forget everything else that's been happening around the world. Ed Davey talking about the Tory penalty on wanting to be a homeowner. This is getting personal stuff. This is as if the general election is actually closer than you and I know it is.
Yes, and he was talking in his speech as well about the well-known constitutional scholar, his words, Nadine Dorries, who has been saying, of course, that a general election would be necessary if a leader was changed. She's changed her tune on that now, but clearly her words being used there by the Lib Dem leader who has been calling for a general election too. Now, is one entirely likely? No, not at all. Of course, the Conservatives have a handsome majority and they would not want to give that away. Looking at the polls right now, it looks like that the Conservatives would lose it. However, 2 years is a long time in politics. A week is a long time in politics. So there is space to turn this around. And the question is, will people buy this idea that this is a uniquely British crisis, the high inflation, low growth situation that we're experiencing right now?
Sure.
Or is this something that many other countries are facing too?
Yeah, I think the answer is the latter, very, very clearly, as Julian Jessup was making clear. Let's talk about COP27, but it segues beautifully from that, because listening carefully to your analysis, it strikes me that one of the blindingly obvious reasons that Rishi Sunak has gone to COP27 is because he's a leader. He wants to be seen as a world leader. He wants to strut his stuff on that international stage, because he does know it may not be imminent, but there is a general election around the corner.
Certainly, although it was interesting that initially Rishi Sunak said that he wouldn't be going, saying that the domestic issues were what mattered the most. Well, clearly he felt forced to U-turn on that, and he will be going for just one day of the conference. He flies in today, this is the opening day, and tomorrow is the main day of business that he will be attending, a meeting of other world leaders, although it must be said not the US President Joe Biden. He doesn't actually arrive until a little bit later on. But yes, Rishi Sunak will be having some meetings with some world leaders tomorrow and then flies back tomorrow night. So quite a whistle-stop tour, making sure that he was seen to be there, but not doing the whole slog of it.
Sure. The American team led by Tony Blinken, so a proper grown-up team, but as you rightly say, not the president. Nurses, then. We haven't got the result of the ballot, but the Royal College is briefing that it's very clearly going that way. In the context of the November 17th budget, they may strike, they are not going to get money.
It's pretty extraordinary. This is a very, very rare thing to happen, of course, but the nurses' unions say that pay has been kept down artificially for too long. They're asking for a pay increase of 5% above inflation. That would run into a pay increase of over 15%. It's quite an extraordinary amount of money. And of course, as we keep being told, the money...
Do you suspect, and now you talk to these people constantly as well, that Downing Street may have misread this one and still traded on the mantra, you know, nurses don't strike, nurses won't strike?
It's hard to know, although it is interesting looking at the way this government has behaved in both of its iterations post-Boris Johnson under Liz Truss and now. There have been some pretty historic settlements agreed. We'll remember the barristers' strike has actually been curtailed with a pretty hefty pay offered to them. There have been some dealings as well with the rail unions. And so I do wonder if there will be...
It's the politics of public sympathy, isn't it? I mean, Joe and Joanna Public look at a barrister, bewigged, begowned and what have you, but a nurse... the heart goes.
Absolutely. However, of course, there are so many nurses. This is where the particular problem comes. The numbers involved are vast. The NHS is the largest employer in Europe. And indeed, the cost of a 15+% pay rise to the public purse at a time when fiscal tightening is meant to be happening is enormous. I wonder if there may well be some compromise offer and if nurses might well eventually...
We should watch with interest. My old friend John Reid, Labour's health secretary at the time, always used to love pointing out that the only organisation that employed more people than the NHS was the Red Army in China. But there we are. Tom, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for breaking into your Sunday to do a shift with us as well. Informative and helpful as always. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Harwood there, GB News political correspondent. And you are indeed watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more to come in the final 20 minutes of this programme. Sunday Savings will be talking about the app Too Good To Go, which is on a mission to combat food waste. But first, a quick break.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello and welcome back. It is 17 minutes to 2. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News. Having talked about the economy, cuts in public spending, taxes and the rest of it, here's a staggering fact for you to reflect upon. 1 in 4 children of UK care workers are living in poverty. More than 1 in 4 children with care worker parents are growing up in poverty, according to research done by the Trades Union Congress. I'm joined now by Dr. Minna Jongbaya, who is an award-winning lecturer and author and trainer, but more importantly in this context, an expert in early childhood and adolescent issues. Great of you to join us, Doctor. It struck me when I read this report that it is a double hit. Care workers have a tough time of it anyway. We've often talked about that on this programme. But their children are suffering not immediately, but also for the long term.
Absolutely, and it is in the short and the long term. We're seeing toddlers demonstrating signs of anxiety and depression. We've got self-harming happening at age 3 years old because these children are not being able to self-regulate. The impact of poverty on children's early brain development, their all-round well-being and the inequalities it creates is clear. Studies are continually showing that children living in poverty are finding it more difficult to manage their emotions and their behaviour in ways that are healthy and not destructive to themselves or others. And linked to this, their executive functioning skills are greatly compromised. So that's all those school readiness skills like being able to concentrate, being able to problem solve, to plan, to remember instructions and persist when things get tough. So inevitably, expectations of these children tends to be lower, therefore achievement is lower and their life chances are greatly impacted because they don't get into those more prestigious schools, colleges and later the universities.
But if you're a policy advisor, and we've been talking about that, about the economy and cuts in public spending, what's vulnerable, what can go and what can't go. We were running some picture of young people at school. You were spelling it out in that answer. All along the spectrum, if we don't get this sorted out, then we're going to have bigger bills to pay later on for difficult children in schools, special needs teachers and the rest of it, plus in the health service as well. I mean, it's an investment to solve a problem, but to put off longer-term problems as well.
Yeah, we can't be myopic in our approach to this, but it seems to me that the government consistently is myopic in its views. It's not rocket science. We need real investment in our care workers. Linked to that, and I am an early years specialist, we desperately need greater investment in higher quality early years education and care, But again, this sector remains grossly underfunded, grossly under-resourced. And this, as you identified, has a direct impact on the quality of provision and therefore on children's outcomes. So it makes sense to invest as early as possible, all that early intervention, increasing benefits for families living in poverty, which is set at 80% of the real living wage. The answers are there. They just need to do it. They need to commit once and for all.
How depressed do you get yourself as an expert in these matters, and an academic, a trainer, a lecturer and a writer? Because you know, as well as I do, and I've been sitting here talking to people about it for the last 2 hours, extra money isn't going to be found for care workers or other vital workers, and the nurses, one of the most reliable and dignified sections of the workforce, they themselves, as Tom Harwood was just saying, look for the first time to be poised to go on strike over it. There isn't money there to be had.
It is, but they're directing it in the wrong places. We had 300 or so billion pumped into a tutoring scheme for children. But when we understand the process of early brain development, we can't tap into those executive functioning skills first. We have to make sure that our children's downstairs brain, their emotionally reactive brains, are okay, they feel secure, they feel safe, they're seen, they're soothed. But we're just totally neglecting their mental health and emotional well-being and expecting great things of them. It doesn't work that way, and their behaviour continually shows us this. We need support for their mental health. We were promised in policies back in 2017, 2018, that every school would have a mental health lead, mental health training for all staff in schools. It's yet to happen. They are putting the money in the wrong places, and our children are suffering as a result. You asked me how I feel. It's so soul-crushing. It's utterly depressing for us. We've got over 102,000 children that are looked after. We've got foster carers depressed. They can't make ends meet. They're getting food from food banks. I work alongside a fantastic charity called POP, Power of Parenting. They're delivering more and more food parcels to families. This is fantastic, but it's not up to them to do it. We need the government to invest in our care workers before it really is too late.
Dr. Minna, I'm soul-crushed is quite a thing to say, and I'm glad you were able to say it in an open and free conversation. And I'll leave you with one good bit of news, and that is Claire Purcell, who knows how these things work in government, says, although the first draft of the budget will have been delivered by the end of the evening, minds may still be open between now and the 17th of November, and you have made a lucid, powerful, and if I may say so, moving case as well. An honour to talk to you and a real pleasure. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Minna Jonkbaya, who is an award-winning lecturer, author, trainer, and expert in early childhood and adolescent issues. Time now for our Sunday savings slot, and the segue is perfection, because that's last point about the effort of food banks and what people are doing to try and work on the cost of living has a new friend, Too Good To Go. Its mission is to make sure that good food gets eaten and not wasted. Every day, delicious fresh food goes to waste at cafes, restaurants, hotels, shops, and indeed manufacturers, just because it hasn't been sold in time. Well, Sophie Truman, who is sitting next to me, there she is, here in the studio, is the managing director of Too Good To Go. It's a brilliant idea. How does it work? If people listening want to try it out, what do they do?
Thank you, Alastair. Yeah, the app is really simple. It's free for anyone to download, and it connects businesses all across the UK to consumers that have surplus food at the end of the day. So that might be a supermarket such as Morrison's, it could be your local bakery, but you go through the app and purchase a magic bag. That's a surprise mix of whatever is left over at the end of the day.
And crucially, the distinction, although the good doctor there was talking about food banks and that matters and literally vital for some people, this is a win-win, because there is a transaction involved. So if I run a restaurant and I overproduce, then I can come to you. And if I, living down in Hampshire, fancy a Rule's steak and kidney pie for supper, I can come to you. I pay some money, and it's a mix, a match.
That's exactly it. We like to call it a win-win-win. So it's a win for businesses that might have surplus food at the end of the day. They can recover sunk costs through our app, and they have an access to new customers via our platform. It's a win for consumers who use the app because they get access to delicious food at an affordable price. And most importantly, it's a win for our planet because it helps reduce food that is having, sadly, an awful impact on our climate.
I mentioned rules there, sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I do remember the wonderful West End of London restaurant, and I am a supporter of Crisis, the homeless charity, and they had a great deal with rules, and literally that happened. At the end of the day, if there were pies that they'd cooked that weren't required, surplus to requirement, they then gave them to homeless people who could just arrive there and tuck in. But I saw for the first time yesterday in London a lorry that was gathering up exactly what you're doing. So the app is clever, you're brilliant, you're innovative, but is this a movement almost?
I think so, yes. I think with the climate crisis, people are becoming more aware of food waste, and actually the staggering statistic is that globally 40% of all food that it's produced is not eaten. And if you think about that, that's the same as a landmass, the same size as China. So it's a horrifying situation. So I think awareness is increasing. And if we take the environment we're in today in a cost of living crisis, I think consumers at home are more important than ever about saving that.
Final point, and a quick one. People like you, bright as buttons with bright ideas, don't go into these things blind. You want to try and do the right thing. What kind of volumes do you think we're talking about here? What's the potential market between people like me who might quite like it and people like Rules and other restaurants that might find it as a useful way of redistributing?
Well, if we take the UK, every year 10 million tonnes of food...
10 million tonnes?
Tonnes of food is wasted. So, the potential is enormous, and food waste is inherently unpredictable. If you take this morning, a deluge of rain, a lot of bakeries then, might not have the footfall they need, so there'll be even more waste. So it's very dependent on a number of factors, but it's a huge problem, and it's only growing.
Is it the world of apps and IT, not my field at all, but is it a one-woman show, or are you... No, right.
No,
so you're employing people as well?
Yeah, so we have about 100 people work in the UK office, and we're present in 17 countries across Europe and North America. So globally, we have about 1,400 employees at Too Good To Go.
And an ironic question to end on, given what you're doing... It's in a similar field to food banks, but because of that commercial distinction, I hope I've made crystal clear to folk at home. Do you think that it's going to increase in demand? Are you looking at growing demand as people scrimp and save and just try and save literally a few bob, a few pennies here and there? Or do you think yours will be a short-term success, but hopefully you won't have to be doing it in a year or 2 years' time? What's your strategic outlook?
Well, I think ultimately we dream of a planet with no food waste. So I hope at one stage in the future we won't need to be in existence. But the sad reality is right now we do. And as I touched on, with 10 million tonnes of food going to waste, there is so much to do. And we have seen an increase in awareness of our app in the cost of living crisis that we're in today.
Then I bet you'll be sitting opposite me and we'll be talking about something else. And there, just to show, we don't have time, unfortunately, but here we are, you see, it's all proper, and there it is, and we've got here some lovely baguettes that somebody, I can't think who that might be, one of my favourite shops at Waterloo, might just have had a few surplus to requirement, and over there you've got baps and stuff like that.
I think that's local independent bakery near.
I suspect you will be back with your next idea when this one's sorted out. But Sophie, a real pleasure meeting you, and thank you very much indeed for sharing it. And there we are. Don't forget, Sophie's the managing director of Too Good To Go. It is an app. Look it up. See if it fits your needs. Great. I've really enjoyed today's programme. Sophie, all the way back to my great economists and my great political friends. But you too, bless your hearts, have been in touch on our big topics of the day, the autumn statement and the budget. Final take from you guys. Gary says tax rises will lead us into a deep and dark recession. Rishi's doing everything to undermine British prosperity. Jeremy's a lapdog who can't think for himself. Ooch. Peter says, hi, Alastair, they simply take away more from benefits as a two-stroke sufferer in the last 6 months and suffering from mental illness after all the debts I paid, I will have a maximum of £15 a week for food. I'm sure the government ministers couldn't live on that. John Jai says, I don't know if this is still the case, but friends in Germany used to get tax rebates for opting out of their health system and going private. Of course, this meant that lots of young, healthy people paid into private healthcare, but the health service bearing the brunt. Well, there's an interesting thought. We may return to that. We've touched on it before. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's all that we have time for, but I will be back next Saturday from 12 till 2. From all of us here, enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
And looking ahead to this afternoon, the UK's looking set to see some sunshine, but scattered heavy showers also there too. Persistent rain clearing southeast. Let's look at that detail. Bright and sunny spells likely across the north of Scotland. Also 1 or 2 showers, fairly breezy as well there. And a similar picture expected across Northern Ireland, with a mix of bright spells and the occasional shower coupled with a brisk breeze. Across the northwest of England, the showers a little more widespread and locally on the heavy side, giving the risk of thunder in some places as well. Let's move over to North Wales. We're expected there to catch some quite heavy and locally perhaps thundery downpours, although a lot of those showers likely to move up towards the northwest, with Wrexham and Flintshire better placed to avoid them. Parts of the Midlands today likely to have persistent showers during the middle of the afternoon, although they will gradually be moving away to the east, brighter skies later on. And those showers transferring their way then to western parts of East Anglia. So although Norwich and parts of Suffolk do look